Okay, we are back in Senate institutions and it is still April 23rd. And what we're going to do is review with JFO version number 3, which will be the final version that this committee will approve. We're not going to take a vote today because we don't have the language. We'll wait until we have the language, but I expect that version 3 updated 4/23/25 at 2:52 p.m. and it is on our website. Will likely be the complete capital bill as approved as recommended by the Senate Committee on Institutions. Okay,
Perfect.
so
Madam Chair, Scott Moore, Joint Fiscal Office. And Linda, to answer your question, what you posted is the correct. Before you have version 3 of the spreadsheet you're working on. So I've incorporated the changes we talked about yesterday into the spreadsheet. I did confer with council to make sure that he had the same numbers in the language that he was drafting for the actual bill. With that said, if you'd like, we can go through and talk about the changes. So I'll go to the different sections. Section 2, the first change we had made was on line 4, the statewide create for partial stormwater compliance, wherein in FY27 bonded dollars, we reduced the 1.1 million the House had recommended down to $850,000. The second change we made in that same section was for the Pittsburgh Academy firing range. In FY27, the House recommended $200,000, and we reduced that down to 0.
yeah,
Then
right, and it's not our intent that won't happen. It's just that project is likely not to happen before then. It's not on schedule.
I got some acres in the back. You can come shoot in my backyard.
Okay.
And finally, in that same section, line 15, the Burlington 32 Cherry Street parking garage repairs, the House had recommended $500,000. Commissioner Miller yesterday did say that by 27 she'd be okay with cutting that in half to be $250,000.
Yes.
And just so we're clear, that's because of a timing issue. Not anything else.
And I believe she
We're
did,
gonna have to push that. We're gonna have to get that back.
she did say those would be things she'd be asking for next year for the budget adjustment.
Yes.
Section 3 didn't have any changes. Oh, I'm going to say Section 4. It's a little bit misleading in that some of the changes in here, they're in the section 4, but they actually are section 19 because they're cash. But we can just go through top to bottom, if you will. The Bennington High School project, the very cosmetic project, and the Brattleboro project. Those are all cash dollars. They're actually in section 19. You'll see them reflected here in column M in the green. And the House had taken the money away. And we added back in the 1.1 million, 1 million, and the other 1 million, so a total of 3.1 million. Which is about right. And then we get down to the Bennington Battle Monument. This is FY26 bond dollars. The House had taken $419,000 in reallocation money, added $106,000 to it to get to get to a total of $525,000. And you're recommending that we cut that by $100,000, give them $425,000.
Which we believe will be sufficient for the work that will be done this year.
The next item was for the Champlain Valley Regional Planning Commission that was that acronym for. And it's the study on the multi-parcel use in downtown Montpelier. This was on discussion yesterday as the federal building, Montpelier Federal Building. But I just changed the wording to match what the language in the bill says. And we are putting $100,000 to that.
Okay.
The next section here, the next line, we need a VHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, a grant for the purchase of recovery resident. The recovery resident purchase, the language bill has a little bit more to that, but that would be $250,000 to VHCD.
Next.
Section 5, we have the building communities grants where The gov reg had been basically increased by the House for most of these. When the Senate went back to the gov reg and reduced 6 of these by $50,000 in FY 26.
And left the increased amount in FY 27.
Correct, you left the increased amount in FY 27, that was good.
Okay,
The vacancy change should be in section 9. In the agency here with natural resources. We added an appropriation of getting tax. So it is technically section 19, where we put it here just because it goes with Forest Parks and Rec for fire apparatus, $275,000.
You ever find out what,
no, we don't know yet.
I don't have specific
Yeah.
numbers to use, the hooks and ladders, a tanker, whatever.
So how do we go about finding out?
We can ask, Forest Parks and Rec.
Okay,
What, what vehicle are you going to purchase?
okay,
The next line was Fish and Wildlife for Lake Champlain Walleye Association. Currently, we have $25,000 in, cash in FY 26.
okay,
Turning the page. In section 12, the agency of agriculture, food and markets, money for the veterans home incubator fund. That would be at the veterans home, and we have $45,000 in cash. Again, I have this live on the spreadsheet here, but it really is in section 19, again, referencing column 10 is the green. In section 14 judiciary, we looked at the cash fund and reduced the cash fund amount from 8 million the House recommended to 6.9 million, but then made everybody whole for that project by adding 1.1 million in bonded dollars in FY 26. So it's still an $8 million project. It just fairly split between cash and bonded. We then added in section 15, $35,000 in cash to the Black Hydrant Grant Program. And I believe, I'm not sure those are all the changes that we made. Our discussion yesterday.
okay. Look, that looks good to me. Anybody else good with that? Okay. So do we need a vote for the spreadsheet? Sounds like not.
No,
Okay, we vote the spreadsheet and the language.
once we get through the language.
Once you-
Yeah, maybe we'll try.
Once you
Okay.
get through the language, then you vote the bill. The spreadsheet's a great way to track the language.
no pressure,
Okay,
no pressure.
But
okay. Well, good.
You done with me? I'll
Thank you very much.
relinquish the seat to John.
Yes, and this is the day of stopping and starting, because I had thought that we wouldn't be able to do the language, but maybe we will. Are we ready?
Yeah,
And thank you for being here.
I can now grab my pages. John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I will just say I have a hard stop at 4, but I think based on.
I'm hoping we would be done at 3:30.
Yes. That's awesome.
Because I was actually gonna schedule.
I love that. So let me screen. This is reflective of all but one thing I think you just talked about.
So, and my understanding is I have the bill as introduced of that. I just want you to see. So this,
Mhm.
and then the draft 2.2.
Mhm.
And the two of those together are. I just
Yeah.
want to
Yes,
confirm.
that's the way it looks. Yep.
Okay. And does everybody on the committee have what they need?
Yes.
Okay. Safe job. Okay, so whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm getting in the Zoom right
Oh,
now.
okay.
Almost there. There we go. Thank you.
So the first number
Yes.
on this is on the last page of the spreadsheet.
Um, yes, so what you're seeing here in draft 2.2 from this morning, these are instances of amendment to the capital bill. So it's not a full strike all. It's just speaking to the particular pieces which you're changing. And any highlighted text that you see here are changes against what the House has done. So what you'll see, for instance, is a section included, and any unhighlighted text is what came in H 494 as passed by the House. So your first instance of amendment is to the intent section, section 1 of the capital bill. And this is just reflecting moving 700,000 from FY27 in bonded dollars to FY26 in bonded dollars. So it is the intent of the General Assembly, and you have this particular aggregate figure. This is your aggregate bonded dollar figure, that not more than 62,314,000 shall be appropriated in the first year of funding. So we had to change this figure to reflect moving 700K from FY27 to FY26. And the reason that 700K was added was so that you could fully fund that Winter County Courthouse, and you guys looked for money yesterday afternoon and that was
Yep.
Your second instance of amendment is to your section 2, which we typically think of as like your ETS type section. So these are state buildings. And again, your sole changes are in highlight. So we're not looking at anything in FY26. We're looking on page 2 at changes to the appropriations in FY27. So under subdivision 4, your 3-acre parcel stormwater compliance, I think this was reduced by 250,000 to the 850,000. What you won't see here, but you'll see that I've highlighted the numbers just to draw your attention to this. Former subdivision 6 was your Pittsburgh project that at 200K as received from the House, and that's been zeroed out. So it doesn't show up here in the bill anymore. It will show up presumably on the spreadsheet because that reflects comparisons against what you received from the House in the GovRec, but you're not going to see it here because it's no longer a line item.
Great.
Lastly, you see on page 3 that 32 Cherry Street parking garage repairs project. I think this is another 250K reduction, I would say, down to 250K. So that produces some savings in FY27, 700K, which is the figure that we were trying to find to fund that Winter County cross project.
Right, and so your subtotals are
Yep.
accurate.
And these I've talked with Scott about, so we've been aligning these, so we should be we're on the same
Yeah,
page.
and they match.
Yep. Your third instance of amendment is to your commerce and community development. This is a reduction in the Bennington Battle Monument project that had been at 525K. That's now dropped down to 425K in FY26. So you guys also looked for some additional funds in FY26 to shut off through this to make whole the Windsor County perhaps. And you're going to see on page 4 just conforming changes, right? We have to reduce that FY26 appropriation to reflect that reduction of 100,000, and same thing for the total appropriation. Your fourth instance of amendment is a number of changes to your grant programs in FY26. Each of these was set at 300K. And all of these, but the final grant program for the fair and field days has been reduced from 300K to 250K. So that's 6 instances. That's saving 300K right there and shaving off 300K. So that's what you see on pages 4 and 5. Again, you're going to see the necessary flow through changes on page 6 to the reduction in appropriations. You've shaved off that 300K, so you go down from 2.4 to 1.8 million in FY26.
So when you say float,
Yes, what the
to me
bottom
that means subtotal.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's an
No,
easier
that's
way to
you
say it.
can.
It's an easier way to say this. This just reflects the totals above. You add all these up, it will tell you
Okay.
your FY26 and 27 and across the biennium figures. Your fifth instance of amendment, this is your section 14 judiciary. So this is the project that we've been talking about. I had to create on page 7 a new subsection K, just because we now have a separate piece. Funds are going to the judiciary for these particular projects, but I created a new subsection B, which is at appropriation of 1.1 million in FY26 to BGS. for those renovations at the Windsor County Courthouse in Frederick, Virginia. And again, that was sourced from the funds that you were talking about yesterday. And of course, it boosts by 1.1 million this subtotal.
Perfect. Thank you.
The sixth instance of amendment is to your cash section. We've talked about all of this. I think there may be one update I have to make based on some things that might have happened this afternoon. But this will reflect all of the numbers and projects you've been talking about. The reason you see highlighting is, again, I'm showing highlighting against the House version, not against the last draft you saw. So on page 8, again, this is your cash fund section for the Windsor County Courthouse. You see that 6.9 million figure. When you add that with your 1.1 in bonded that we just talked about, you get your $8 million figure. We've talked about the Veterans Incubator Farm. We've talked about the 3 Bs, which are subdivisions 9 and 11 across pages 8 and 9. We've talked about the Winston County Center housing infrastructure. We've talked about the study in subdivision 12. The one that I did want to talk about is your subdivision 13, which I'm hearing there may be a slight language depending on the committee's appetite. But currently we have this set at going to DHCD for a grant, the purchase of a building in St. Albans for recovery residents. Same figure that you guys have been talking about, but I know that there have been conversations while I wasn't in the room. So if you have a change, and I have received language, but if you guys endorse the change, you want to update this language, let me know and I can do this immediately.
And what is your language?
I will may be better positioned to speak to what I've seen.
Sure. Madam Chair, for the record, Will Anderson from Finance and Management. The administration discussed this idea after we learned about it yesterday. And our main issue with it was not the idea of investing in recovery residents, but that it would be dedicated ad hoc to this project, St. Albans, with somewhat vague language intending to go there. So our suggestion is to change this language to be within HCD for a competitive grant, which is the first distinction. The second one be that the grant is along the lines of our existing recovery housing program, which distributed federal funds from HUD, the HUD department. So this would invite essentially applications for different projects to have their merits considered and have HCD distribute that money as they've done in the past. Also been communicated this to Senate appropriations, but frankly, I don't know where they stand on it. It did seem like they wanted to target this project to St. Albans, so I really can't speak to that, but just to the administration's position on opening this up to potentially other projects and their merits.
Well, we need to know the specific language you have appropriations has, so we align.
That I think is the rub, and I've communicated the administration preferred language to them, but I'm not sure what position they've taken on it.
Well,
Okay.
it'd be a bummer not to be able to vote this out because we don't know the language, Madam Chair.
Right. It would be, but I'm also thinking we're going pretty fast. And there's some other language that I want to make sure is correct. So I think what we're going to end up with, what I am hearing from the administration, we definitely need to add the word competitive for grant. And then you want us to delete St. Albans at least and add other language referring to existing grant programs.
That's what I've instructed them.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and which is a little bit different than the language that I saw an hour ago or so.
And Madam Chair, I can speak to this a little bit.
Okay,
Remember the idea that this committee gives the language to appropriations. This is the intent of what we want to do. Then appropriation will then appropriate it appropriately. And so as long as the language matches, and if we have a disconnect in the language, that's where the problem really arises.
okay. Well, what I would suggest, at least we add competitive and we delete St. Albans. It could still be in St. Albans, but we don't direct that so that we're closer to what the administration wants. And we never saw this directly. So
Remember, this is one of those things that came from appropriations, so they're gonna.
right. So they can change it if they want to change it.
So we can't vote the bill out if our language isn't identical with that.
May I offer something from a timing perspective that might?
Sure.
So you could stick with this. I understand you could be saying you would like the update for competitive grant, but it sounds like what you're envisioning is that in any event, Senate Appropriations has to confirm the particular language. We're not going to have that confirmation in 10 minutes for this thing. But however, Appropriations can suggest an amendment that aligns once they have settled what this language is, an amendment to this bill. So there's a simple way to achieve conformity where you can vote the bill out now as drafted, unless there are other changes that you need to make, and you just receive that confirmation of the language from Senate Appropriations. But I'm not saying you have to do
Yeah.
this, it's just,
Of course, it has to go there anyways after we voted out
Exactly.
anyways, and so, okay.
Right, but I would prefer to do something that wouldn't require an amendment, so we
Right,
just
right,
have
but-
fewer amendments.
and the reason I suggested what I did is that we don't know what you've proposed will satisfy them.
Right.
Right, so it's trying to get at it, but if they don't like it, they're still
Yeah.
gonna propose an amendment. So
I agree. Or I don't need to agree, but yes,
you make the call, I don't.
given that, we haven't talked about the other language, and I want to make sure that that language is appropriated
Sure,
and
should I jump to that?
fulfills the intent. Well, let's just go through
Mhm.
this, but I think given the time that we have, we're going to vote this out tomorrow. All right, I don't want to do it in a rush. You guys go with that? Are the appropriations folks gonna be fine with that? My expectation was not that we had to do this today.
I can't speak to them in terms of the bill, what the appropriations committee needed was language on the cash.
Yeah,
And they have language on the cash currently, minus this one item. So for the purposes of how the session runs, making sure this can still be our committee to the appropriations committee to the floor, and getting out the door. That's a little bit more of a question for pro tem. But in terms of what we at JFO have, we've given you the numbers work. So if you delay the bill for another day, that's
all right.
outside of what
All right.
scope of work.
So let me just be clear, or I need to understand. It sounded as if any of these words are different in the final version, that will require an amendment. So if they're going to have an amendment, that's a whole process, and would that amendment process include this committee? Or would they just do that on their own?
There would probably be a straw poll, it would be my guess afterward, but,
So it would have to come back to us. Or it would come back to us.
It would come to the Senate floor as an amendment from appropriations, and then we vote on it on the Senate floor.
Okay, so that seems,
And
Not-
you're going to have amendments anyway, no matter what we do, what we send over there.
well, I'd like to minimize amendments if possible. So let's go through the rest of this language and
Okay.
see how far we can get, and maybe we can do it in 15 minutes.
cool.
Okay.
So the remaining pieces we had talked about yesterday, your subdivision 14, 15, and 16, for that fire apparatus, the walleye, and the dry hydrant program, those are all consistent with what you saw yesterday. I think that there was agreement at that time.
Uh-huh,
Same figures. But the new piece here is your and some sort of amendment, which adds a new section 22A. So where this fits into the underlying bill is you're now in the policy section of the capital bill. Section 22 relates to tweaks to the cash fund. So this is naturally falling from that statutory update. This is in session law. This is tasking joint fiscal office, Scott here, on report December 15th of this year, when submitting a report to you guys and the House Corrections Institutions on considerations for use of the cash fund that provides the historical context, including the economic rationale for the cash fund. So why bonding versus dollars? Distinguishes between the intended uses of those two sub-accounts, your classic capital infrastructure sub-account and your other infrastructure sub-account. Described for each year since the cash fund's inception, the sources of funds. So is that a contingent transfer? Is that 4% transfer from the general fund prior year, netting out in debt service cost? And the annual expenditures from the capital infrastructure sub-account. So what has happened each year that this has been in place? What capital projects have gone through? And outlines the current legislative process by which appropriations are made from the cash fund. Just pointing to this particular piece because obviously it's outside the scope of the statute itself. That's sort of what are people doing in the hallways? How have these made it? Did they go through? It's kind of a broader conversation about how you guys are routing things through up here. Authorize spending, then send to appropriations to actually make the appropriations decisions. So that is the extent of what I have on the cash fund report.
Where did you get this? Well, I guess it doesn't matter because where we at. This language is a little bit different than what I expect. Because the factual information is helpful. Sources of funds, annual expenditures, history, but the main part of the intent for me was to facilitate and start a conversation on the pros and the cons of using cash. And I see, I mean, the economic rationale is part of that, but
Yeah.
distinguishes between the intended uses. That's not exactly pros and cons.
Yeah.
So some sort of analysis with either a recommendation or even not necessarily a recommendation for action, but a recommendation of how the conversation should go and what we should be looking at as a legislature, because my concern is that we're not fulfilling the intent of the language of the statute that was passed just 6 years ago. Was it 6 years ago? No, it wasn't very long ago. 22. Okay, 3 years ago. So we're ignoring it. So we should either, in my opinion, change it or not ignore it. So this is the intent of this is not to just be a report. It's supposed to be the basis of conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't, I guess, realize how broad it's. I would call out to this particular language in the lead-in, which is that the report is on considerations for use of the cash fund. It doesn't explicitly say pros and cons or recommendations for. I was also in part trying to be respectful of JFO's position and just providing considerations rather than saying you should do X or Y, right? Like that's not
the you should do or the why is not our scope.
I
If you
understand.
wanted to know the pros and cons of cash versus bonded, we could give a report about that.
Yes.
But specifically, why you should use cash more or bond more would not be something that.
I'm not looking for a recommendation. I'm looking for just before you get to a recommendation. The things that you would make sure that your client knows before you get to a recommendation.
I will say, and maybe this just isn't strong enough, this specific point that we were just talking about, including the economic rationale, was meant to get at this. Like, what are the differences between approaching cash and approaching bond? Like, why was the cash fund created, right? So part of it is historical context. That could be how the process came about that you created the cash fund, but also like, what was the economic justification in the first case for creating this?
Right.
But you can totally change this. I just
No, and I circled that because that is the closest that we get to that intent. Perhaps something saying, comparing actual use versus the economic rationale.
Okay. So down here we have in subdivision 3 the annual expenditures. You want something that's like, do the annual expenditure? Is there alignment between the annual expenditures and the economic rationale?
Yeah, or a comparison between the economic rationale and reality.
My initial reaction to that, Madam Chair, is that sounds almost impossible to do because we're not going to put numbers to what the economic rationale would be necessarily to what the actuals were. That's a hypothetical. What I'm hearing is you're comparing a hypothetical to reality.
Yeah.
And
or a goal to reality. There were goals in that statute.
I'm going to talk out loud for a minute, which is maybe dangerous, but
we have to do it.
Possibly I'm hearing if we were to fund all of these projects in bonded dollars, you're going to look at bonding at 3%, 4%, that's going to cost $1 million. If you use cash instead, that would save that $1 million. Is that the kind of direction?
That's part of it, but that's a lower, the part of it that I find compelling is that if we have a mix of bonding and cash, we reduce our reliance on bonding, which eventually will get us to a point where we have lower bonding expenses, the interest rate, that's what other states are doing. So we're in competition with other states, and it's
I think
done.
that going back to this to show the benefits of using cash versus bonded, that's something we can do.
Okay.
I'm not sure that gets to what you're trying to get to, but to show the benefits of all cash model versus an all bonding model,
I would say half.
right? We can look at that. That's within our valuation.
Yeah.
Compare economic advantages of cash versus.
I mean, modeling.
Or financial. I would call it like financial management rather than economic.
Modeling bonding versus cash, that's what we do all the time. We do lots of models.
In comparison, and so you can project, at straight line projection, not. Is that enough?
It might be helpful if you didn't like the compare financial advantages of.
Yeah, but it's basically financial management or debt management.
Right, but you're trying to get an advantage, right? You're trying to get.
Well, advantages and disadvantages. The pro and cons is what was suggested, and that makes sense to me. Because then we would have your assessment, not your recommendation, but your assessment of the pros and the cons of doing what was established in the statute.
Okay. And if the plan is not to vote this today, which is what I'm understanding, then I can also talk with Scott to just make sure the language makes sense from
Yeah.
what.
Because that's just really important to me to be.
Yep.
That was part of our discussion.
Okay.
In
You know what I mean?
2022, there was that report in the act that is.
Analysis of benefits and costs of dedicating this revenue source to the capital expenditure cash fund in comparison to,
So this report exists.
that would be helpful. Well, have we seen it?
It's on
Well-
the info website.
Okay,
So do you want to take
well, I
You can look
still
at that report
want
and see
to
if
get,
that's the
well,
sort of-
when was that done?
2022,
Okay, so that was done, but when it started.
when it started,
All right, so that would be a really good starting point. That's,
2023.
all right.
Then-
Okay, well, that's good to know, and I'll take a look at it, but I do want this language in this bill.
And just so you know what we're talking about, it's Act 185, 2022.
Okay.
So section 0.106.2, you'll find.
Okay, and you can send me a link and send all of us, why don't you send all of us a link, or send it to Linda, and then everybody can see it. All of our fans can read along.
Send an email.
All right, so then we're not gonna finish it today.
Okay.
But I have all confidence that we'll finish it tomorrow. Cause you were able to be here tomorrow.
Tomorrow I'm booked until 6 p.m. So
I thought we had you, didn't we?
No, it's for today. We were struggling to.
I'm more free on Friday.
Okay,
This is a rough week,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
which sucks for you guys, but.
well, it is what it is. Okay,
Um,
well, we'll figure it out.
I mean, the other, I don't want to hold people here today, but, I don't know, you guys is available, I can be available late today if that is helpful, but I know that may not be an option for most.
Oh,
Like, late is an after most people, like after 5,
like 6 or something.
but I don't want to hold people at lunch.
Oh, we only need 3 of us. All right, well, we'll,
Yeah, just let me,
if it's available, if we are able to, if we have people, then we'll come back.
yeah, just reach out if that happens. I'm
Okay.
happy to try to work with you.
Okay. Do you have what you need to?
Yes, I mean, it sounds like in part we're in a holding pattern related to the language related to the recovery residents. That
Right,
was the And then I can talk to Scott about, this particular, and I'll look at that helpful, Act 185 report.
Okay.
It's, I mean, the language is helpful to me regardless
Yeah.
of what the report is, so.
Yeah. Definitely. All right.
Cool.
So we were making a lot of progress. Oh, okay. Well, and we're probably gonna be adjourned while you're gone. All right, so the spreadsheet's great, check. Language is great, but not quite done. So we just need to get the language ready and then we can go to
Which
that.
I think, Madam Chair, is just the two items.
That's what I believe.
Separate house and the intro report language.
Yes. Yes. And if anybody else has opinions on it.
Are you gonna have to figure out this?
Okay,
Okay, we can.
Are we-
I might walk back with.
are we,
Be here. I think we're good for that.
Walk over.